This conference will now be recorded.
So let's get started so that other guys will get joined in middle. So if you remember, yesterday we have started understanding the Azure backend. Backend in the sense when you try to go to the portal, or when you try to execute some CLI command, or when you try to use some cloud shell, how your Azure will react to that particular operations what you are trying to do. Okay, and also we are trying to understand some technical terms like what is Azure resource organization, okay, what is Azure resource group, what is subscription. Okay, so these are the things which we are trying to understand one by one. So this is the basic in the sense, if I don't explain this terminologies, right, whenever I'm talking about this, you might think what it is. Okay, so that's the reason we have started with this particular basics. Organization, which I've already told you, just a recap, it is a tenant, or it can be a default directory, or any directory in Azure Active Directory. So resource is nothing but whatever you try to create from Azure portal or Azure dashboard. Okay, so that is nothing but a resource. Whether you try to create a virtual machine, virtual network, storage, okay, application, if you try to deploy for a service, all these things are called as resource. Okay, which is provided by Microsoft. And the resource group in the sense, I want to manage some particular resources under one particular group. I want to group them. Okay, so grouping the resource together is called as resource group. That's it. Logically it will group that particular resources together so that I can manage the permissions, life cycle, other things as well in the resource group. So it looks like this. Under this resource group I can have n number of resources. It is up to me how many resources I want to create under this particular resource group. So resource group is mandate whenever you are trying to create a resource. Resource group is mandate and subscription is also mandate. Why? Because it has to generate a billing, right? So under this subscription only it will generate a billing. So you have to tell under which subscription, under which group you are trying to create a resource. It looks like this. Under subscription, you will create n number of resource groups, which I've told you yesterday. Under the subscription, we can create n number of resource groups. In each resource group, you can have n number of resources. All these resource groups and resources are managed under one particular subscription. So for this subscription, a billing will be generated. Okay, so that is the purpose of your subscription. Not only the billing purpose, suppose if I want to manage some permissions also, if I apply to the subscription, automatically it will apply to your resource groups under this particular subscription, and also it will apply to all the resources under this particular resource group. So that is a hierarchy in the sense, if I apply to him, it will get applied to all the members under that particular subscription. Okay, so that's the reason in different ways this will be useful actually. Okay, so I'll keep it so simple so that we will not get confused. So right now just understand what it is. Okay, so practically you will see what we are trying to learn here. Theoretically you will try to see it practically one by one. Okay, so now license. So this is where we have to start from today. So licensing is nothing but you have to purchase a license for certain operations you want to do in Azure. Okay, there are different licensings which we have to purchase. Let's say I want to create some users accounts. Okay, Office 365 accounts and all. Okay, I need to purchase a license for that. Let's say 100 license keys, so that every user will have its own license. So how many users you want to manage, those many Microsoft Office 365 account license keys I will buy. Okay, so that we will attach to your what is Azure Active Directory. Okay, so that's the purpose of license keys. And then the major and important thing which is really important for us is nothing but resource manager. So resource manager in the sense, let me open the dashboard, portal.azure.com. If I go there, it will ask for login. If login credentials are already saved, it is auto logged in. Okay, so resource group in the sense, as I told you, but either you will log into the portal to create some resource, or from the cloud shell you will try to do it, or from the CLI. by executing some CLI command. So these are the three locations where you will try to create a resource. Okay. When there is an API call which is reaching to this particular destination of your Microsoft services or the products, what it will do exactly, what is happening in the backend. Okay, I want to know that. So this is where the picture talks about. Okay, so before creating a subscription or before creating a resource under some particular resource group and subscription, first of all, your what do you say, your API call, the REST API call will reach to the resource manager. Okay, Azure Resource Manager. So that resource manager will validate all the parameters what you have passed, and then all the parameters are fine, then it will go to the next level. Okay, the first component who will receive the information in Azure side is nothing but Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so this is one of the service of your what do you say, Microsoft, and this service is common for all the resource which you try to create in the Microsoft side. What a service you try to create, maybe virtual machines, maybe Active Directory or subscriptions or virtual machines, virtual network, container registry, SQL databases, whatever you try to create. First, whenever I execute some command, and if I say enter means to create, first it will go to my resource manager. Okay, so it will reach to the resource manager with the help of REST API call. Okay, so that's how it happens. After reaching to it, it looks like this, either from the PowerShell or Azure portal or from the Azure CLI, you will try to communicate to your resource manager. Okay, technically this is what it is happening in the backend. Okay, so that's the reason we are trying to understand the backend picture of your Microsoft product actually. Okay, so this cloud, what are these are called as interfaces, right? So whichever interface you use, all of them will try to pass the information to the resource manager. Okay, after reaching to the resource manager, okay, then there is another component called Azure Resource Providers. Resource provider in the sense, suppose when you are trying to create some virtual machine, in that virtual machine, let's say it will have some underlying underlying components that has to be created, means a small components. All these components will be represented as provider. So virtual machine provider in the sense what, it will try to create some particular interface, okay, public IP address, and it will try to do some networking operation to attach an IP address to your virtual machine, and it will try to do some storage operation to create some particular disk that to be attached to your virtual machine. All these are underlying operations which will be done, that will be done by a resource provider called virtual machine. Okay, so resource provider in the sense who will actually create your resource. For example, let me show you. Let's say here I'm clicking on this virtual machine. Let me try to create this, or I can say here create a resource. Okay, you can come here, go to compute, and here let's say create. I'm trying to create some resource. Either I can do from there or I can do it from here like this. Okay. Let me, as I told you before, subscription is mandatory. Under which subscription and under which resource group you want to create this resource. Okay. So let me select this. So the demo which I already have. If you don't have anything, you can create it. It's up to you. Okay. Let's say this virtual machine, I want to give some name called Ubuntu demo server. Okay, so this is getting created in this data center, and rest of the things are like, let it be like that. Ubuntu, that's fine. I want to use password based authentication for now, so test user, and the password I want to keep it so secure. Okay, and then here I just want to explain you about that resource provider. Okay, it's not about creating this virtual machine. So networking, let it be like that. Management, advanced, let it be like that. So review. So when you say review and create, what will happen? I will tell you. It went to your resource manager, and it will validate whether all the parameters what you have given are correct or not. If all the parameters are fine, it will tell you that valid. validation passed. If some parameters are missing and which is not appropriate to this, then it will tell you like it is failed. So these things will be done by your resource manager. Okay, so resource manager will take that information and it will give it to your resource providers. Okay, now what resource provider will do when I say to create this, see what happens. Which is a resource provider, I will tell you. It has started the deployment. It has submitted the deployment. You can see the pop-up over here. Okay, and then see this. Here you will see the deployment details. Let me show you one by one. You can see the subscription and you can see the resource group and start time when it got started. Okay, you can see here. Now if you understand what is your resource provider, now the resource provider is Microsoft.network. This is called as resource provider. Okay, so it is taking the help of the resource provider called micro. See, you can see it from here, from the bottom to the top. That's how it will get created one by one. Now you can see this resource provider has created a network security group. In order to create a network security group resource, it has taken the help of resource provider called Microsoft.network. And this is Microsoft Network to create a public IP address. And it has taken the help of a provider called network to create a virtual network. And to create a network interface, it has to taken the help of the network provider. And it has came back after these prerequisites are done with the help of Microsoft network provider. It has came back to the provider called Microsoft.compute and has created your virtual machine. So these are the steps which have been involved when you're trying to create this particular resource. So here the providers are called as Microsoft.compute and Microsoft.network. To create that particular resource, this particular provider is so important. It is present under that particular resource provider. As per the programming or as per the structure, this is how it is. Okay, so your resource provider is nothing but the actual component who will try to create the resource. Okay, that's how it is. So this is called as resource provider. So to create a virtual machine, it will call that particular resource provider. When it is creating this virtual machine, it will call your another provider because this provider is dependent on another provider. You can see here. My Microsoft.compute is dependent on Microsoft.network provider. So it has called it and it has created this particular individual components one by one. That's it. After this particular thing is done, then it has called my actual provider and it has created a virtual machine for me. And this virtual machine was created successfully. Okay, you can see there. So this is how it is. Now I can log in. Okay, if I want, I can log in. I can restart this virtual machine. I can shut down. I can delete this if it is not needed. All the things I can do. You can see there is a public IP, private IP. Okay, and this is the size of the VM. 2 core CPUs and RAM is 8 GB. So this is how it is created. Okay, that's what I mean to say. Okay, so if you want, you can take this screenshots. You can put it under this what I will say, under this particular thing. I can just add it so that everybody can understand this. What I can do, let me open that. Okay, so meanwhile, yeah, so this is what I mean to say. What is the purpose of resource provider? So your resource manager cannot create that resource. It is taking the help of your resource provider, and your resource provider is actually doing the operation. Who is doing your operation exactly? This resource provider, not the resource manager. Resource manager is only to validate the schema, validate the user, authentication, authorization. All these things will be done under resource manager. That component will do it, and after that it will pass information to the component called resource provider. Okay, so from the CLI through the REST API call, it will reach to your resource manager. From the resource manager, it will go to your resource provider. Okay, so that's a flow. Next, after creating the resource provider, it looks like this. Okay, it will create a resource for you.
Hi, Sudhir. One question here.
Listen.
Yeah, so this resource manager and resource provider, right? So
Yeah.
are these the physical services in Azure portal, or it's a kind of backend service running in the background, like
It is backend. It's backend.
okay,
It's
so
not a physical entity that you can manage. Okay.
okay,
It's a
yeah,
program
both.
designed in the backend of the cloud.
Okay, so both are same, like
Yeah,
resource
both.
manager
Both.
and provider.
Yes.
Okay, okay, fine, yeah.
Nothing to do from your end. Just we are trying to understand the flow so that if something fails in tomorrow, right, you will understand where it got failed, in what place. Okay, when you start some troubleshooting, or if you're trying to raise some ticket to your Microsoft support and all, you'll come to know what is the flow actually. Okay, when I try to create something in Azure, what happens in the backend. Okay, just to know that picture. Okay, so that you will not be in a position not to understand what is this Microsoft.compute, right? If I ask you what
Mm-hmm.
is this Microsoft.compute slash this virtual machine, you are not in a position to tell it, right? If you don't know this particular flow. Now you know that this is called as provider and this is called as your resource name. Simple. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
So
thank you.
yeah, we are not writing any program to change this flow or doing something. Okay, that's a behavior of your Azure. So this is how it looks, the flow. It will perform the PowerShell or Azure portal or CLI. It will go to your resource manager as I explained in the above, and it will go to the resource provider. From the resource provider, it will create a resource. Under this subscription, under this resource group, it will create a resource. Okay, that's how the flow starts. Azure Resource Manager requires the client to specify an identifier to both the subscription and the resource group in order to manage the virtual machine resource. As I told you before, whenever you are trying to create anything, okay, you have to specify your subscription and your resource group. Without specifying these two components, you cannot create a resource. Okay, it is so mandatory. You cannot skip. Why? Because it is a star mark, right? Means mandatory option. Okay, now no need to worry. Subscription, it will not be done by you. If you are the owner of that particular portal, you will add n number of subscriptions if you want, and under that you have to decide under which subscription I want to create this resource, so that the billing will be generated under that subscription. Okay, so don't assume that I have attached this particular resource under one subscription and you are looking for a billing in another subscription. That will never happen. Billing is individual. Okay, so be careful with that as well. You will come to know one by one. We are too early to talk about understand these concepts, but theoretically try to understand what is this all about. Okay, understand the flow. That is enough for us now. So before any resource manager request, you already know this. I explained about this points. What are the bullet points I have written here, right? That's what I have explained actually. The first control is that the request must be made by a valid user, that you already know. Authentication. Okay. And you have to have a permission to create a resource as well. That's the two thing. So where it will get validated? As I told you before in the previous example itself, in the resource manager, before actually creating a resource, it will verify from your Azure Active Directory, is he a valid user or not? See, it is not verifying it. It is not the internal component of Azure Resource Manager to validate your username and the password, the authentication mechanism and authorization, both. Okay, so to validate that, your resource manager is trusting your Azure Active Directory. So I'm not doing it, so please can you do it and let me know. Which means that I'm trusting someone, okay, to do that operation. So that is called as trust relationship, the technical term. Okay, so that is called as trust relationship. So there is a trust relationship between your Azure Resource Manager and the Azure Active Directory for authentication and authorization. So if your Azure Active Directory says that yes, he is a valid user, you can go ahead, then your resource manager will go to the next level. Okay. So that's the first thing you have to remember. So authentication, authorization will be done by your resource manager. Okay. That is for sure. After this, okay, and then the resource manager, right? You can see here in Azure AD, users are assigned into tenants. Users in the sense, whenever I try to create a user, right? Let me show you. I can remove this. Okay, let me remove this particular resource, right? I will do that. Delete, and here I have to pass this name to delete. Apply force delete and enable this as well so that it will get deleted and delete. You will come to know after this, so don't worry what I'm doing right now. Just to show you the flow of it, I have created this virtual machine. So now let us go back to this Active Directory. Okay, so this is called as tenant. I told you, right? I have two tenants right now. One is default directory tenant. Under this, I will create some users, groups, and all. The users which have created under this particular thing will not be available under another tenant. Okay, so that's the first thing which you have to remember. Let's say I will try to create some user. Let me show you, but I think, okay, yeah, let me create some user. So forget about what parameters I'm passing, just I'm trying to create some user. Let's say Sudhir. I will give a name called Sudhir, and then first time, last time, I'm not worried. Auto generate password. Okay, if you want, you can assign some role. You can see there right now it has auto given as user role. Okay, if you click on this, you can give whatever the role you want. Okay, let's say in Azure Active Directory, what this user can do only in Azure Active Directory. It is not about your resources. Okay, so do remember about this particular thing. I will tell you once again, but just telling you that. And let's say I will create this. Now this user was created. You can see here. Okay, who has created this particular user? Okay. Now if I go back to another tenant, you can call this one as a tenant or organization or a directory. You can call with these three names. So don't get confused. So right now the current tenant is for this user default directory. I want to switch to another directory right now, means another tenant. So select this and switch. I'm going to that particular tenant. Okay. Now under this tenant, if I look at the user, he is not available. You can see here, this user will be there. Why? Because he is the owner of this entire portal. So this user will be there. But what about the user which have created? That is not available. So every tenant is individual. It is isolated. Okay. So that's what you have to remember. Okay. So the tenant which have that, this is what the meaning is. In Azure AD, users are assigned into tenants. As you know, now you can say the users are created under tenant. A tenant is a logical construct that represents a secure, dedicated instance of Azure AD, typically associated with an organization. So a tenant is nothing but, let's say, as I told you before, when you're trying to create some portal, let's say you are the owner, let's say you started some company, okay, a startup company, and there you got one client. Okay, for that client, you will create a tenant so that I don't want to disturb the other clients who are coming in future. Okay, so let's say there are two clients which came together for you to do the project. Now for both the tenants, you will try to, sorry, for both the you what is the clients, you will try to create two tenants. One tenant is for one project, some X project, and another tenant for another project, Y project. Okay, so what are the users you create under this particular project? He should not be available for another project, right? It is, seriously, it's an issue, right? So that's the reason you will be creating two tenants, and under the two tenants you will create the users, different users, okay, who belongs to that particular project. Okay, so that is the meaning of this. A tenant is a dedicated instance. Okay, it's like a logically created in order to segregate the users from users, groups, applications, everything. In order to segregate that, we are creating a tenant. Under the tenant, whatever you create, that will not be visible under another tenant. Okay, both are individual. Though you are managing from single portal by the administrator, okay, he can see the information, but a user cannot see the information of two tenants. Okay, until unless you give a permission. So keeping that aside, each subscription is associated to a Azure AD tenant. As I told you before, every tenant can have multiple subscriptions. Okay, let me go back to this because it doesn't have any subscription. See, If I go to the home page, again it is asking you to purchase a subscription. But I have a subscription, right? Why it is asking this question? Because that subscription is present under this particular directory. Which one? Default directory. I have not purchased any subscription under this particular tenant. So that's the reason it is asking me that. Okay. So every tenant should have a subscription to do some operation. A tenant can have multiple subscriptions, but a same subscription cannot be attached to multiple tenants. So it looks like this. Let me explain in diagram. Let's say this is your portal. Okay. Now you have created some tenant. For example, you created one tenant and there is another tenant. Okay. So let's say this is called as tenant A. Okay. And this is called as tenant B. Tenant B. Okay. Now I purchased a subscription. Let's say the subscription name is pay as you go. You already know about it, which I've used. Or let's say Sudhir. The name which I've given to my subscription is Sudhir DevOps. Now, what I mean to say is like this particular tenant is attached to this particular subscription. Means the subscription is attached under this particular tenant. If I want, I can purchase another tenant, another subscription as well. It is possible. Okay, so I can purchase another subscription as well. Why? Because I want to maintain some billing for another applications under this particular subscription. I don't want to disturb this. Okay, so if you want to do like that, you can. Yes, we can create another subscription as well under this particular tenant. So billing will be generated for this subscription and for this subscription actually, and according to that you have to do the payment. This is fine, this is what I mean to say, but the same subscription cannot be attached to another tenant. This is not possible. Okay.
So
Once a tenant is created under one, sorry, once a subscription was created under one tenant, the same subscription cannot be attached to another tenant. It is not possible. Okay. You cannot do that. But a tenant can have multiple subscriptions. Yeah, Ramkrishna, you are asking something?
yeah, see, for one tenant, the same pay as I go, I cannot select for another.
No, the same subscription you cannot share it with another tenant. It is not possible.
Okay.
Is that your
So
question?
yes, that's correct. See, pay as I
Yeah.
go, the billing purpose. So, but for the same two tenants, I want to use the same pay as I go. So why
No.
I can't?
You can't use it because as I told you, right, tenants, the purpose of creating a tenancy is to isolate. Okay, so when you're trying to do it, this particular users might be using some large resources, and this particular users under this tenant are using only less resources. For both of them the billing is getting generated. So how will you segregate them, saying that your users are using this much of this and this is your bill, and your users are using this much of bill and this is the your what do you say, the bill which got generated? Can you do that calculation? You can do it, but it needs lot of manual effort, right?
That's correct.
So to segregate this information in order to do this and everything, so you cannot create this particular same subscription, or you cannot attach a same subscription to multiple tenants, but a tenant can have multiple subscriptions. Okay, for billing purpose or for permissions purpose, whatever it is. Okay, so that's what I mean to say, and this is what the line is talking about. Okay. Okay,
And
each
the
subscription is associated with a Azure AD tenant. Yeah.
and the subscriptions which are available, those are the
Yeah.
default or which we can create our
Oh,
own.
I purchased it actually. So you can purchase, you can talk to the sales team of Microsoft Azure, and you'll get the best based on your discussion, right? How large your company is, what kind of resource you are trying to use. Based on that, they will try to provide you some subscription, right? With some offers or something like providing free Teams account, okay, free Office 365 account. They might provide you based on your company, your size, what you're talking about, what you're trying to create about all these things. Based on that, your sales team will give a best subscription for you. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that always every company will use pay as you go. Pay as you go only, but they will give you some more license keys, Okay, and more like it all depends upon your discussion with the sales team. Okay, that also matters. Okay, that will be not done by you. It will be done by your leads. Okay. Yeah.
I have a doubt.
Uh, is someone asking something? Sorry, I hear some
It's
low voice.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Manish.
Kumar, I hear.
Yeah,
Can you speak in front of your mic?
yeah, sure. I have a doubt that
Okay.
if I want to use the same tenant for my another, uh, I mean, if I want to use the same subscription for the another tenant, can I do that in the separate one?
See, that's what I mean to say, right? If you want to use the same subscription, you have to switch. The
Okay,
subscription you have to remove from here and you have to place it under another tenant. But at a time cannot be attached.
okay,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
So that is all about the tenants. Okay. So that tenant, the users under that particular tenant can have a permission to this resources under that particular subscription or the Azure Active Directory as well. That's what we mean to say. Okay. Now, after this, the next control is to check whether we have a sufficient permissions to make a request. As I told you, permissions. Authentication is done. That's good. We have some authentication. We are allowed to create a resource. But are we really allowed to create a resource? Who will verify that? That will be done by your Azure Active Directory. It will check what role is assigned to you. Okay, what role is assigned to you. If that role is allowing you to create a virtual machine, then it will validate and it will verify it, and then it will tell to your resource manager. Okay, so resource manager, if the permission is allowed, then it will create a resource for you. If you don't have a permission, you cannot create a virtual machine. As I told you before, authentication is not only the right thing, right? Authorization is also important. It doesn't mean that if your authentication has been passed, you can do everything in the portal. No. Okay, you need to have a permissions as well. If you don't have a permission, even though you have logged into the portal, you can't do anything. Okay, so even though if you're logged into the portal, a proper role should be assigned to that particular user or a group or a subscription level or whatever it is. Okay, the user should be associated with this particular role. Then only you can do that particular operation, whether you're doing from CLI, portal, or PowerShell or any other cloud shell. Okay, so that's the meaning of it. Okay, authentication, authorization, both. This will be validated. Okay, Azure Resource Policy, that is the next level. What is the purpose of it? There is a resource policy. So resource policy in the sense, it specifies the operation allowed for a specific resource for a user is allowed to deploy a specific type of virtual machine. For example, I have written some policy, okay, Azure policy, saying that if anyone is trying to create a resource under Mumbai region, it has to reject. Let's say I have written some policy. Policy in the sense rules and regulations or limitations. Okay, I have written some policy. There is some particular service which we can write our policy. In this policy, I have written something saying that if a user is trying to create a virtual machine in one particular region, it should get rejected. Let's say the user from CLI or from the portal or from the cloud shell, he is trying to create a virtual machine in Mumbai region. So the request will come to the resource manager. So resource manager doesn't know about it. It will pass information to the Active Directory for authentication authorization. When it is doing this authentication, it is done. In authorization, role also been passed. But what about policy? In the policy, it is telling that you should not create that particular virtual machine in that region. So automatically it will get rejected. Okay, though your authentication authorization has been passed, as per the policy, you are not allowed to create in the Mumbai region. Let's say there is some government policy or your internal company policy. Policy in the sense what? Rules and regulations that you have to follow. Okay, and you should not violate that. Okay, so similarly, in Azure also we can create some resource policies. This is all about resources. Means which resource you can create, in that resource where you can create, what parameters you can pass, what parameters you cannot pass. That also you can control in the policy. Let's say He can create in any region, but he should not use some particular Ubuntu image. So if he is trying to create a virtual machine with Ubuntu image, it should get rejected. So that also I can create a policy for that. Okay, so you can create a number of policies to add some security level. Okay, so that's the intention of policies. So we have a service for that. Okay, if you want, you can search for that. Okay, policy. Here it is. Okay, you can create some policy and you can attach it. Okay, so that's how it is. So right now we don't have any policies created yet. Okay, so if it is the policy is violating, right, it will show you non-compliance. Okay, exempt, and then complaint. Okay, so if you click on view all also, I don't have anything right now. This is the dashboard. Okay, so where you can create some policies and you can see the exceptions. Okay, that's all. And then that's the next level. And one more thing is nothing but limits, resource limit. I can set some resource limit, which is nothing but quota. Okay, why you have to learn this? As an administrator, you need to know how to create a policies, how to set a resource limit. Nothing but quota. Okay, for this particular tenant, if someone is trying to create a resource, okay, let's say I have allowed the users to create only maximum 50 virtual machines. Okay, not more than that, because it will add more billing. As per the company's rules and regulations, I want to set some limit saying that if someone is trying to create a virtual machines more than 50, it should get rejected. So that I will specify in the resource limits. Okay, so resource limits in the sense, let's say we have a limit in creating the resource groups, maximum of 980. Okay, that is a maximum resource groups that we can create under a subscription. In real time you never created, hardly you will create maybe 5 or 6 or 10 or 15, not more than that, resource groups. Okay, or you can create up to 50,000 virtual disks of a type in a subscription per region. So these are some predefined limits which we have. So I want to set some limits into my virtual machine saying that I should not create more than 10 virtual machines or 20 virtual machines. Then I will set some quota, resource quota, saying that you should not cross beyond that. If you are trying to create that, it will reject you. Okay, so with this help of this, you can do this. So your resource manager has to pass all this. When you're trying to create a resource, when you add these many security levels, it has to pass all of them one by one. How many securities you had, that much time it will take to create a resource. Okay, so it depends upon how many restrictions you have added. Okay, then financial commitment limits. So financial commitment limits instance, that is the last option. Okay, nothing we have after it. Okay, resource limit is done. Okay, sorry, resource policy is done, resource limit is done. Next, financial commitment limits. Let's say my budget is 1 crore rupees. As per the project, let's say my budget is 1 crore rupees per annum. Okay, so which means that what are the resources I'm trying to create in Azure portal, the billing has to not cross beyond 1 crore per year. How I can set that? Let's say users are keep on trying to create it. Let's say if it unfortunately crossed more than 1 crore, let's say 1 crore 50 lakhs or 2 crores, the billing got generated, then that is a problem for the client, right? He's not willing to pay. Okay, as an administrator, how you can add a limit to the client requirement? Client requirement is, he has already told in the discussion, when he, as an administrator, you will join some call. Okay, he told me that as per the limit which I have financially, I can put an effort up to 1 crore rupees per annum to my resource what you are trying to create. I can pay the bill up to 1 crore. Real time it's not that possible easy, but I'm saying you technically. So if you or let's say monthly I can spend only 10,000 rupees on my resources, for example, I say. Okay, if it is crossing beyond 10,000, then that is a problem for your client, right, who cannot pay the bill. Okay, so how you can set a limit? Okay, you created some resources, that resources is generating some based on the calculation, cost calculation, it has already reached 10,000 rupees. Now you are trying to create another resource. When you are trying to create it, when you add this financial commitment limits, okay, since there is a financial commitment limit saying that 10,000, if you are trying to create another resource which is trying to cross 10,000 rupees, it will reject. That resource will not get created. Okay, so these are the three additional things apart from authentication and authorization which you can add it in the resource Azure portal. Okay, so these are the additional security levels that you will be adding to your what is it, the resource creation. Okay, so this is what you have to understand the flow. This is the last diagram which you have to understand. Okay, authentication, authorization, verification, everything will be done in resource manager. Then only it will go to the next level, that is resource provider. It has reached to the resource provider in the sense all the verifications has been passed. Then you are allowed to create a resource. Then it will start creating a resource. That's it. Okay, under which subscription you specified, under which resource group you have specified, under that it will create a resource for you. Okay, so that's how the portal was designed, the Microsoft. Okay, if someone asks you the security levels where we can add, what are the limitations you have added for your project and all, that's the last diagram which you have to explain. Okay, so as an administrator, I have created a resource policy. As an administrator, I used to create some resource limits, and as an administrator, I used to create some financial commitment limits, which is called as cost budget, and I used to put some restrictions so that my users who are trying to create some resource are not crossing beyond the limitations which I have, because there will be so many people working in the project, right? So how you can monitor individually them saying that not to create this, not to do this and all, that you are put it in as a resource policy, what to do, what not to do, everything you are placing in the resource policy. And I'm setting some limits saying that a person should create only these many VMs. If he is crossing beyond that, it should get rejected. That is another level of security. And the last one is financial commitment limit. Nothing but I'm adding some budget saying that if someone is trying to create a resources which are crossing the budget of 10,000 every month, it should not get created. Okay, then you will start analyzing. Then you will talk to your client saying that I need to create this, but the financial budget is this. So do I need to proceed or not? So there will be some lot of calls, email chains which will go on. Okay, it is not that easy that you will get an approval and you will try to create it immediately. So it doesn't mean that in real time you will go and you will create like anything whatever you want. No, for everything you have to set some policy limits and all. Okay, so that is a recommended and the best approach. Okay, so let me go back to this particular directory and this. Okay, so as I told you before, the first service that, so with this we have completed and we have understood the flow. Okay, nothing else. So this is what I want to explain as the first before going to the Azure. Okay, so you have to understand this technical terms. Resource organization is nothing but a tenant, or you can call it as directory as well. Azure Active Directory, some directory which you create, default directory, also the DevOps which I created. Okay, resource group, subscription, license, okay, and resource manager, resource provider, okay, and then resource policy. All these things you have to understand. These are the technical names. Okay, so then we have to start with Azure Active Directory. Okay, so in Azure Active Directory, we first thing what we have to do is nothing but you need to understand what is tenants. Okay, what are tenants, how many tenants I need to create, and how to delete a tenant, what I can do in a tenant. So everything we'll see one by one. Okay, so always if you want to manage a tenants, you have to come to the Azure Active Directory, because this option is present only under Azure Active Directory service. Okay, so by default you have already logged into Azure Active Directory, a default tenant called default directory. That is a tenant which I've logged in by default. If I want to switch or if I want to create a new tenant, then I have to go to an option called under overview. We have to go to a tenant. Okay, and then from here you have to create a tenant. Okay, so this is the domain name. By default your tenant will have some default domain, which means that whenever you try to create a user, that user will get a email as username @ this email address, domain name. Let's say you're working for Infosys, or if you're working from Accenture, or if you're working for any certain project, right? What will be your email address? Let's say like saikumar @accenture.com, or saikumar @infosys.com, or something like that. That infosys.com is nothing but your domain for that user. Okay, so representing your tenant. Okay, maybe all the companies are using Microsoft Active Directory. I hope so. Most of the companies. Okay, so they are using this Active Directory. So that is well designed. You already know this is an existing feature actually. Active Directory, Microsoft Active Directory, right? Now, since we are using it in the cloud, they call it as Azure Active Directory. That's it. Okay, so this is to manage your authentication, authorization, and a centralized location for this. Now, if I want to create a tenant, how I need to do it? So you need to click on create tenant, and then you have to do that. So let us start this particular thing from tomorrow. Okay, so I don't want to put it in a half of, like, we have only 10 minutes, right? So in that we cannot do all these things. Okay, so let us understand about tenants tomorrow. I will explain about tenants once again, and then we will start how to create a tenant. By default, remember guys, when you try to create an account, right, you will see only this. Here the domain name will be according to your email address. Okay, and this is what you will see. This one I have created actually. This one I have created additionally. Okay, so in that way also we will create another tenant tomorrow, and we will see what are the steps we have to follow. But it is actually so simple. Just you need to give a name and you have to create. That's it. Only 3 steps: basics, configuration, review, and create. These are the 3 steps which are involved to create your tenant. Okay, so let's catch up tomorrow and see how to create a tenant. After the tenant creation, then we need to understand what about users, groups, okay, roles and administrations, okay, and then we need to understand enterprise applications, then about app registration, okay, and then we need to understand about custom domain names, password reset policy, user settings, properties. So these are the things, and monitoring. Okay, I want to know how many people have logged in, how many people have signed out, how many people have given wrong password, means wrong authentication. All these things I want to monitor. So that can be done here. Okay, sign in logs, audit logs, provisioning logs, log analytics. Okay, so diagnostic settings in this is if you want to troubleshoot something. So all these options are available under monitoring. So let's understand one by one. Okay, yeah. So don't think that for Azure DevOps is this needed. Yes, it is needed. Okay, it doesn't mean that only administrator will do it. Even DevOps engineer also need to know about it. Okay, then when someone is talking about that, right, you will understand. If you don't know the terminologies and what are the functionalities of it, you will never understand what administrator or other person is talking about. Okay, okay, if you have any questions you can talk to me, like something like if you have not understood in this flow. Okay,
Sir,
or
I have a doubt. I have a doubt.
yeah,
I would like to know that you have mentioned in the Azure Resource Manager that what is meant by roles-based access control. I
resource
want to know
manager. Okay,
where, uh, where you have mentioned it's a roles-based access. Yeah, here I
this
got.
one.
Oh yeah, yeah. There you have somewhere you have mentioned.
Okay,
Yeah, here you have mentioned it. Roles-based access control. What is meant by?
yes, role based access control rules
Yeah.
are back rules. Yeah, so there are 2 types of roles actually. One is
Okay.
for Azure Active Directory roles, and one is for your resource access. Okay,
Okay.
there are 2 different roles actually. Those 2 are not same. Okay,
Okay.
for Azure Active Directory you can give a role, which means that when someone logs into the portal, can he access the Azure Active Directory or not? Okay,
Okay.
in Azure Active Directory what he can do, for that we have a separate roles. Okay,
Okay.
that is different, and that another resource roles are different. Okay,
Okay. Resource
Hello.
roles means what you are going to do in the
What
resource.
resource you can create in that resource, what you can, whether you can delete it or not, whether you can create it or not, whether you can update it or not. All this comes under resource roles. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. In Azure Active Directory, what users you can create, whether you can create a users or not, whether you can create a groups or not, that comes under Active
Yeah.
Directory roles.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
So
Technically,
where
those
we
are called as roles for Azure Active Directory. For resources, it is called as RBAC, rollback access control.
you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mahinder, you are asking something.
where we actually I mean to say where we actually assign these roles in Azure
It's
portal.
simple. Let's go here, right? I told you for Azure Active Directory, we have a separate roles. If you go to the roles and administrators, here you can see the roles.
Okay.
That's okay. What is my role? You can see here. The user who has logged in, the role is global administrator. He is the owner of this entire portal. Okay. If you want to create same privileges another user, then you have to attach something called administrator. Let me search for that. Administrator. We have so many administrator. Which administrator you want? Application administrator or billing administrator or authentication administrator. If I give this, what will happen? He can create a user, he can delete a user, he can reset the password of the user, everything he can do. Okay.
And this will only be done uh, after this Active Directory authentication. If it
Yes.
not
See,
authenticated, then it will not be done.
yeah, let's say, for example, I created a user, Mahinder. Okay.
Okay.
So Mahinder has got a notification saying that you need to log into the portal. Let's say you logged in. Okay. Now I've assigned you a role called user administrator. Now what you can do in this Azure Active Directory? Can you go to the application registration and you can register some application? No, you cannot do that. Can you create a groups and users? Yes, you can do. Why? Because your role is assigned with user administrator. So those operations you can do. You can see here, can manage all aspects of users and groups, including resetting the password of a limited admins.
Okay.
Except for global administrator, you can reset the password for other users as well. Okay. So these are the role which is assigned to you for Azure Active Directory. I'm not talking about resources. For resources, you need to go to individually for subscription, and here I need to do this. Let's say here it is called as IAM. Okay, and here you need to assign a role. Okay, which role? Owner role, contributor role, reader role, ACR delete means Azure Container Registry. Okay, Azure Container Registry pull, push. Okay, virtual machines, Kubernetes, all these things. These are called as RBAC, rollback access control. Okay, so people will get confused, right? So that's the reason why we have to, how we need to manage and all. That's the reason I'm not talking about this. First, let us understand the Azure Active Directory roles, then we will understand the resource roles. Okay.
Sir, can you give me repeat it once again back?
See, there are two roles. Roles we have, for a few roles we have for Azure Active Directory. What you can do in Azure Active Directory. Okay. For that, we have Azure Active Directory roles. There are other roles which is called as RBAC, rollback access control. That roles are to assign a user like what he can do on the resource. Whether he can create a virtual machine or not, whether he can create a containers or not, whether he can create a Kubernetes cluster or not. All these are different.
Okay.
Okay. So we have two types of roles. One is Azure Active Directory roles and one is resource roles. Okay, which is called as rollback access control. Yeah. So first we will understand thoroughly about Azure Active Directory, and then if you understand the roles and administrators, then you will understand the concept. Okay, we'll go one by one.
Okay.
So that's all for today. If you have any questions, you can stay back and ask me, or else we can wind up the session. For everything, we have a document. So in meanwhile, we will create a WhatsApp group as well. So when you're practicing, right, if you have any questions, you can ask me in the WhatsApp group instead of waiting for the next day. Try to ping me on the WhatsApp group so that we can interact. Okay. So whenever you are putting some error, right, try to put the screenshot so that I can understand what you're talking about. Okay.
So Sudhir, I have a question actually.
Yeah.
It may be not related to this topic right now topic. So
Yeah.
instead of Ubuntu, so we want to select as a Red Hat image, and so how the licensing and all will be operated. I mean,
License automatically provided by your Azure. If you want, you can use that license. Okay. It will cost. It will tell you the billing as well, like how much it will cost and all. If you don't want to use that license, you can go ahead with your own license. You can update it. Okay.
so on the subscriptions also, if we want to different subscriptions on the Red Hat
Billing
level.
will be added automatically, right? Under your subscription, you will see the billing for that virtual machine, whatever license you are using, that will get generated automatically. You can see it. You can filter and you can see how much bill got generated. But while creating a virtual machine, right, it will show you the estimation cost, how much it will be costed every month. Okay.
Got it.
Based on that, you can decide whether to create it or not, whether to use it or not.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So no other questions. So try to ask questions. So because everybody is new, right? So don't hesitate. Don't feel shy because since you doesn't know the concept, so that's the reason you are here, right? So try to ask the questions. Don't think about others. That's what I mean to say. Okay. Ask the questions, whether it is silly question or high level question. I don't bother about it. Okay. You have to ask question when you don't understand. Okay. Don't think that what other people will think about me for about the questions what I asked. Okay. Don't hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.